First of all, let me thank you, all of you, to take your time and come this very cold weather in the middle of very working summer to join us at the Startup Grind. I see a lot of new faces, and I want to tell you briefly what the Startup Grind is about and what our values are and why most of you should be here and what you can bring to the society and community. So Startup Grind is the biggest startup community in the world. It started in Silicon Valley back in the day, and now it has spread to more than 120 countries, 400 cities. And the sole reason for the Startup Grind is to help create the startup community. So not all of the startups need only funding. They also need marketing. They also need developer, because I get asked all the time, do you know developers? So of course I do. They also need lawyer, accountant, etc., etc. Some of them may just need a helpful word to encourage them. So we are all in this together. And individually we're so much less than together taken. And I encourage you to get to know each other. So Startup Grind is not only about speaker, it's also about, and more importantly, getting to know each and every one of you, having a great time, and trying to help and be a very helpful person. So we have 3 core values. First is make friends, not contacts. I know a lot of you have a lot of friends in Georgia, but it's always nice to make new friends again. So give first, don't take another one, and help others before yourself. So it seems very altruistic, but it is the thing that helps build the society that is destined to succeed. This is what sets Silicon Valley apart from New York and Boston area, because apart from funding, they also had the great support from the community, and communities stood together, and they reached amazing goals. So after the speaker, I encourage you to continue the Sing exhibition, and also encourage you strongly to meet every one of you. So my name is Georgi Tukhashvili. I'm co-director of Startup Grind Tbilisi chapter, and I want to give a word to Colin, and he's going to introduce some other stuff and thank our sponsors definitely.
Okay. Thanks, Gio. I have to say, one of the most important things that I know of in a startup is finding good people to work with. If you can find a co-founder or co-founders who you really are in the groove with, and where things just go easier and things are bigger and better than you thought they could be, you got to really focus on that. And I just want to say, I want to give a big thank you to Gio, because really this is why this room is full, because Gio has so much of a heart for the Georgian startup community. He's called probably almost all of you on the phone and said this is a great thing, you should be here. So let's just give another hand of applause. Gio Tukhashvili is kind of the rock and roll star of this. So I really am impressed with this crowd. Look around you. There's some very talented, inspired people, interesting people, people who came back from their vacation, took buses from Batumi to come and hang out and learn from our speaker and meet each other. First, though, I want to thank a couple of our sponsors. If I could thank the Embassy of the United States of America, who's been our most consistent financial sponsor for this project. I'd like to offer to Jeff to say a few words. He was just saying planted there, so I wasn't sure. So yeah, big round of applause. We've had some amazing speakers coming in from the States, courtesy of Jeff and Company.
Thank you very much. First of all, I'd like to echo Colin's words. It's really great to see such a big crowd. I've come to a couple of other ones. You've probably seen me at a few other ones, and the crowd was a little smaller. And so seeing this kind of burst, I don't know, maybe it's August, people have time off, so they're doing something fun, I don't know. But I really want to thank Colin. I want to thank Georgi, because these guys basically have been the backbone of this whole project. And I would also like to thank our guest speakers who come from very far distant places. This one in particular, because I think that what we try to find here as the U.S. Embassy is the ecosystem for entrepreneurship and business, economic growth and development. And actually, I was just here last weekend on Saturday listening to the Prime Minister talk about something not necessarily related, eradication of hepatitis C. This is not about eradication. This is actually the exact opposite. But the Prime Minister has said some key things about economic stimulation, growth, development. And so we're trying to capitalize on that with activities like this to tell you that this is a moment, and this is a moment where you can pounce. I am not an entrepreneur. I am a nerdy bureaucrat, have been my whole life. My brother inherited all the entrepreneurship genes. He does venture capital real estate in Moscow. God bless him. So I think what will be interesting tonight is listening to you. And hopefully you take advantage of the fact that we have a Georgian expert here, plus American entrepreneur, plus someone who's very familiar with not just your language, but your system. So there are no tricks to be pulled here today. It's going to be a very good opportunity. So thank you for coming. Without you all, there's no real startup grind. And also without you all, you're basically the engine on what we're hoping to see in Georgia. So enough said from me. Thanks again, Colin, Georgi, and I hope that you enjoy the night. Please ask very difficult questions. Our guest struck me as someone who's particularly personable and easily drawn into interesting conversations. So I have no doubt that's how it's going to be.
Only so difficult questions. Let's not go overboard.
No, let's go overboard. So thank you again, and enjoy the evening. We're happy to be a sponsor, and we're really happy to see you participate. Thank you.
All right. So the other speaker I'd like to have briefly is Avtandil from the Georgian Innovation and Technology Agency. I'm very happy to be in Georgia at a time where the government is taking very active steps in trying to push this startup community to the next level. So Avta, thank you.
Hello everyone. First of all, I would like to say that it's our privilege to be here and to host the amazing speaker. We are not hosting, we're hosting here in Georgia, but the Startup Grind is organizing everything, so we are very thankful. And I would like to say that the government of Georgia has firm commitment to support the innovation ecosystem here in Georgia. We know that this is very important for our development path. And I think every one of you are aware that the Prime Minister has the innovation development in his top priority. It means that the government is committed enough to make everything happen, but we cannot make this by ourselves. We need you, and it's very good that I am seeing the number of the community is increasing. Also, of course, it's because of the amazing speakers that we have today, but it's also the fact that the community is increasing itself, and to have this speaker also enables us to attract new faces in our community. And of course, the important thing is that the quality of the community is also increasing. So I would like once again reiterate that the government of Georgia will always support the innovation development, and we believe that the future is in your hands. Thank you very much.
All right. So yeah, we're definitely blessed here with a certain point in time where there's a lot of support for entrepreneurship. And I want to echo what Guido said, that there's so many resources in this room. When I first talked about starting Startup Grind a couple years ago here, restarting it, people said, oh, it's a small community. We all know each other. Like, why do this? But look around the room, and my guess is there are a few people you don't know here who can really help you unlock some opportunities for developing your companies or finding things to invest in if you're on that side of things. So the roll call with sponsors. I also want to thank the British Embassy, who provided some support for 20 people to go from Georgia to the City of London for Startup Grind, meetings at Google Campus, meetings in the British Parliament, and many other things that's putting Georgia on the map. It's pretty amazing. Also want to thank Stamba and the Ajara Group for this amazing venue and the great hospitality that they've been providing us. I'll thank myself, Georgian Ventures. I want to thank Crystal Fund, who's been a long-term partner of ours from the beginning. Even before you heard of Startup Grind, they were coming to meetings and helping us figure out how to do it. Menu.ge, again, a big partner from the beginning. A lot lot of props to them. Also Palitra Media, more recently, Entrepreneur Magazine, Ilya State University, Tbilisi Startup Bureau, and Terminal. So let's give a round to the other sponsors. Okay. But most importantly, I want to thank George for taking time out. I don't know if any of you are aware of how much it takes to grow a company and how much of yourself you have to throw into it, especially at certain times, such as when you're fundraising a new round to get to the next level, or when there are big deadlines, or so on and so forth. So it's a relentless process, and I just thank you very much for taking time out to be here and share your experience and inspire some people.
Thanks for having me, and I'm not that much fun, so let's see if we can make this interesting. I'm very happy that part of our team is here. So we have about 60 employees in Georgia, and about a dozen of them are here, so thank you for coming.
Hey, let's give a hand around, Shiv. So yeah, I mean, that's the thing, is sometimes your role is to be out in front and get all the glory and get all the rotten tomatoes.
And all the blame, too.
Yeah, exactly, rotten tomatoes, too. But it's the folks on the ground who make the company succeed, that create the company every day, step by step. It may not seem glamorous, but it's an incredibly important role in startup growth. So for those of you who are not familiar, this is a fireside chat. We're going to have a question and answer between the two of us, and then we'll throw it open for some questions at the end. The idea is not to cover everything that you might want to know, but to sort of gain some insight and feel for the story of becoming a serious entrepreneur. I am hoping that afterwards we'll have some more time to have conversations, question and answer, and if you really are in the process of doing something and want to bounce ideas off, I wouldn't be surprised if George was amenable to that. So
happy to try.
That's awesome. So tell us about your first entrepreneurial activity. Did you start with Shift, or was there something before that?
Well, this is now, I guess, the fourth company I've done. My very first company, I opened a video rental store in 1986 here in Georgia. Completely failed, but I did own about 250, 300 Russian dubbed illegal videos that I rented out. I was very fortunate to be able to leave to go to school in the U.S. The people who made that happen actually are here now, which is really awesome for me. In 92, I went to the U.S. to go to high school, and then in 96, I started college. And in college, my best friend and I, we decided that we could buy clothes in the U.S., put them on a plane, ship them to Georgia, and sell them here. This is 1997, 98, so like very different world from what you're used to now. Internet is just developing, right? So it's very hard to actually communicate still. And so we did a tranche of this stuff. We bought about $1,000 worth of clothes, shipped it to Georgia, nearly died in New York trying to get the stuff into British Airways' hands. There was a huge snowstorm in Vermont, so driving back was like a miserable experience. The stuff actually sold, and we broke even, which we're like, oh, that's crappy. Didn't make any profit. Let's not do that again. 20 years actually we learned that if you can break even, meaning not lose any money, even if you didn't make any profit, that's actually a really good thing. Because I've lost about $120 million in 2 companies since then, and have not broken even yet. So it was a really good outcome. Many years later, in 2007, I started another company called Taxi Magic. People who've used like Taxify here or Yandex, any one of those kind of applications, Taxi Magic invented the idea of using mobile phones for on-demand ground transportation. This is pre-iPhone, pre-Android phones. BlackBerry is the primary device in 2006. We put apps on BlackBerries to be able to let people book taxis in most major U.S. cities. So I did that company with, again, my best friend from college, Toby. That was our second company together. That company did quite well. It's still in use in the U.S. It's called Curb. So if you're in New York, you can actually use it to book taxis, or if you're in Vegas, you can do the same thing. And most of the time when you pay for taxi with a credit card in New York, you use software that we created. one of the big things I learned doing that company was that not being in Silicon Valley was a huge problem. We did that in Virginia. There were reasons to do it there, but we would have been a much bigger company, and we probably would have been Uber had we been in San Francisco. And so when I needed to decide what to do next, one of the drivers of my decision was, hey, go to California, because I knew I was going to do another company, and I wanted to do that in California to not have the problems that we had being outside. I tend to joke that building a company is like taking a really big rock up a very steep hill, and then when you're not in San Francisco, it's a much steeper hill and a much heavier rock. And so I made my way to California and then started Shift in 2013-14, so nearly 4.5 years ago.
And so we hear a lot about the importance of Silicon Valley. Do you suggest that people here just move to Silicon Valley tomorrow because otherwise there's no way to do it?
No, I mean, look, you can build a lot of great things in a lot of great places, and I think, like I was reading recently, there was a story in Recode today about Index Ventures. Index Ventures is a fund based in Europe, and they've had these amazing exits the last 6 months, including 2 European companies, right? Spotify went public, and then Aiden, which is a payments tool that they invested in, went public as well in Europe. Clearly you can build companies elsewhere, and everyone knows that. I think it's harder to build companies elsewhere. And then secondarily, if you want to have a global market, you have to be able to reach that somehow. And for startups, selling to other startups is actually a lot easier. And that's a huge benefit of being in California, that you have a ready-made user base for your product. Because a lot of startups will be much more willing to live with problems when they build applications using your technology if you're partnering with them. And that's easier to do if you're in San Francisco. So there's definite benefit of being in San Francisco. I don't think that means that you can't do it anywhere else. I just think it's harder, and I'm in awe of people who do it elsewhere.
Mm-hmm. Great. So is there a certain stage in maturity where it's really important to be in that environment versus sort of in the very beginning?
I mean, I don't know. That's a tough question. There's a company I really like, and I've learned a lot about it now because my assistant used to be the assistant to the CEO of that company, called TalkDesk, which is basically a voice over IP phone system that's really taking over and winning a ton. The entire engineering team for that company, it's over 150 people now, is based in Lisbon, Portugal. And it's not like they outsourced it to Lisbon. The company actually was born in Lisbon, and most of the development happened in Lisbon, and then they moved out to San Francisco to build a business for themselves. And so all the non-engineering stuff like marketing, sales, is done in San Francisco, and all the technical development is done in Portugal, which has been pretty incredible for Portugal because they've never seen a company like this develop before. And since then, a bunch of those engineers have actually gone on to build other companies. One of those engineers then built a big development shop that he now uses to outsource engineering meaning as an outsourcer to companies from abroad, and that's been really successful. So that's one model that's pretty intriguing, and I think people should explore that here as one option.
So you studied at a liberal arts college in Vermont.
Yep.
Did you do the cutthroat business degree at Middlebury College, or what did you do when you
cutthroat business degree in political philosophy. I didn't read a lot of Aristotle and Plato in college. So I'm a very big believer in learning impractical things, and I actually don't like to hire people with practical business degrees. I think they're completely useless. So marketing, etc. I just don't even explore, and I really don't like MBAs either, to be honest. I have a few MBAs that work at Shift because you have to, and for some functions MBAs are really necessary, but all the younger people that work at Shift that I mentor who say they want to go to business school, I spend a lot of time trying to dissuade them from going to business school and tend to think it's a really bad idea. If you want to get a practical degree, I think the only degree right now that's worth having if you want to be in technology is one in computer science. So if you really have a strong belief that you need a practical education, that's the thing I would encourage doing. But I learned how to think, how to write, how to consume a lot of information and turn it in insight in what I learned in college, and that's what I do most of the time all day. in my current job, and I don't think I could do my current job without having had that background. And I totally get how it's this like, I'm going to spend all this time and money getting an education, I better get it in something that I can use in a practical way. But the reality is almost nothing you learn in school will be applicable to your job. That's just the reality. Even like in law school, which is very clearly a very practical degree, most things you will learn in law school you will never use as an attorney. Most things you'll learn to take your bar exam you'll use as an attorney, but not the stuff you learned in law school. And that's why people get a law degree from a great law school and then spend 6 months prepping for a bar exam, right? Because they actually didn't learn anything necessary for the bar exam while in law school. And so I don't think that's a smart way to plan one's career, is to be in this practical sense of like, hey, I need to learn these practical things to be able to have a career.
So it sounds like sort of learning how to think in a systematic way and to write and to analyze is more important than maybe the content that you get.
Yeah, I'm a big believer in that. Yeah, I mean, my co-founder and my co-CEO in my current company, again, we've done 3 companies together. Same education as mine. He also has a PhD in Russian weapons transfers after the collapse of the Soviet Union. I mean, he's probably the best kind of senior leader that I know for a company, and an amazing, both entrepreneur but also leader of a very large organization. No MBA in sight at all whatsoever.
So what would you say if folks, or maybe say young folks in Georgia who want to be startuppers or build companies? I don't mean like a lifestyle company or like some small SME, but who, if they want to become someone who can grow technology companies that scale and that make global impact or at least regional impact, what is it that you would recommend to them to do?
Well, for starters, get a team. It's very difficult, if not impossible, for people to build companies on their own. And so I think teams are really important, and co-founders are really critical as well. Because most companies at some point go through impossible time periods, and the only people who are going to be fully vested to stay there through that time period are people who were with you at the ground floor on day one, in your garage, kind of as the joke. Okay, it was my apartment, but same thing. For a while, I was living in my apartment. One of my co-founders was sleeping in my guest bedroom, and my living room was our office. And so my third co-founder, who kind of has 2 kids and, gets up at 6 in the morning with one of our newborns as we're starting the company, would come to work at 9 in the morning, knock on the door and say, hey guys, are you awake? And, walk in, and most of the time we were not awake. So like once you have those kinds of shared experiences, it's much harder to kind of not be there for you when things go wrong, and things do go wrong. That's almost guaranteed. There's not a company I know that hasn't had some hiccup at some point. Uber was one you could point to for a while that they didn't have a hiccup, and then 2017 happened, and we all kind of know how things went there. So I think getting a team is really critical. The second thing I'm a very big believer in is test and learn. So at Taxi Magic, we had a very big view about we had a very clear view of this is what we're going to build, this is going to be the product. We clearly know that this is the thing customers want. And so we spent 18 months and $2 million building that product. And in 2007, $2 million actually was a lot of money. Today, companies raise a lot more money than they did then, but like a $2 million spent for 2 years was actually a lot. And we launched this product, released it to consumers, and within a month we knew that half the product we built was useless. And meaning consumers did not use the product the way we wanted them to. So they would use the tool to book a taxi, but they wouldn't use the tool to pay for a taxi. And then we would be so difficult that we'd send them this email afterwards saying, you did not use the tool to pay for this taxi, what the hell's wrong with you? You are the problem, you're the customer. And so, we then had to spend another 6 months stripping out half the product to not send them this really awful email to understand, and then build a product that customers actually wanted. At Shift, we actually did things very differently. So Irina, who runs our team here in Georgia, and a small team of 2 people back in 2013, actually did a lot of the testing and learning for us before we even had a business. So we would put listings of cars for sale on Craigslist. We would reach out to customers on Craigslist to get offer products to them saying, hey, would you be interested in selling a Shift warranty product when you're selling your car? Would you be willing to offer a loan product to a customer when you're selling your car? And we collected a lot of data through this completely not real product, because the product didn't really exist then. I mean, it was literally, we were in my apartment and two people in Georgia posting these things on Craigslist. But we gathered a really important set of learnings about how customers would behave, which then fundamentally informed the kind of product we were building. And so I think that teams, number one, and then this testing and learning process where you have a belief of what product works. Don't actually go and build it for scale. Build it enough to be able to test it, see what consumers say, and then go build more of it.
Yeah, sometimes when I talk with folks who are new to entrepreneurship, a lot of times there's an emphasis on the idea and coming up with the idea and working and building and then getting ready and then getting funding and launching. And it seems like the path is a little different in terms of how companies, how it might be best to grow these type of companies.
Well, ideas are, dime a dozen. There are as many ideas as there are people, and it's inevitable that if you have an idea, somebody else and somebody else and somebody else has the same idea. Toby and I had the idea for Shift in 2012, and then I spent a year and a half kind of figuring out what to do with it. But when we launched, there were 4 other companies that launched trying to go after the used car market at the same time. Maybe it was actually 5. And I know one for a fact copied what we did because they took one of my decks and tried to copy it. But the other 4 didn't try to copy us. They were actually kind of businesses that started organically on their own. Now, they were not exactly the same, like no one did exactly what we did, but they did 65% or 70% of what we did. Now, today, one of those companies is public, and the other 4 are dead. So out of 6 companies that kind of launched, 4 died, 1 succeeded, and 1's on the way to success, hopefully. Which is kind of what happens with most companies. Point being, ideas are a dime a dozen. It's all about execution. It's not about, the idea. So oftentimes when you talk to young entrepreneurs about, I can't tell you what the idea is because I'm really afraid someone's going to copy it. Guarantee you somebody else is thinking about the same thing. That's just inevitable. And so I think execution is what matters, and funding is not a milestone of success. Funding is the beginning of the work that you need to do to be successful. That's just very much what you need to fully appreciate. Doesn't mean don't celebrate when you get funding. Of course you should celebrate because it's a big milestone, but it's not a milestone of success of a business. And that's something we always try to dissuade people on our team, that, hey, hard times actually start now, not before you raise money.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point, and that's one thing that a speaker brought up not long ago, which is when you're first starting out, you have certain problems, and then once you get significant funding, then all of a sudden those things aren't problems anymore, and you have new problems.
Well, look, in a startup, my co-founder always says, if you didn't fix it, it's broken. So most things are going to be broken because you're not going to have time to fix most things. And so, and life of a company, when you're starting a startup, with the assumption that you're going to have negative burn being money you're losing, right, is the enemy of a startup is time. You have a certain amount of time, and you got to fix as many problems as you can in that time period, and then go get more capital. So one thing I learned through bad experiences is try to simplify as much as you can. Build as little as possible, and do as few things as possible, and only do the things that you absolutely must do to get to the next milestone. And you always think you can do more, and there's always this kind of complexity that founders want to go after because that sounds sexier and more fun, and that's the vision, I got to do the whole thing. No, simplify, limit the features you're building, do the least amount of stuff possible so that you can actually have a product that hits a certain milestone.
Great. Yeah, it's funny. A lot of times folks here will come to me and say, we want to do this thing that's like Yelp and like Groupon and this and this. And I'm like, okay, well, pick one thing. Do it really well. So let's focus a bit on talking about Shift, and I think it's the biggest story that folks are aware of in your career. If you want to say about how it started and what your first steps were to take it from idea into something.
Yeah. So people don't fully appreciate how big the car market in America is. It's one $1.8 trillion of sales a year. If it was a country, it'd be the 7th largest economy in the world, just the car transactions. So it's massive, and lots of jobs are dependent on it. About 1 in 8 jobs in America are somehow connected to selling or servicing a car. If people follow this, like when the recession happened with the financial markets, actually what suffered most was the car market, and it was a huge problem. I actually don't like to drive. I don't drive today, and I didn't drive earlier. That's why I did Taxi Magic, because I didn't drive. But I eventually ended up buying a car. The car was a lease. I assume people know what a lease is. Like when you get a car, but you get it for only a certain period of time, you pay every month, and then you have to return the car at the end of that period. But in the U.S., you can do a buyout, meaning lease is over, you still owe, say, X thousands on that car. You can pay the owner of the car, which is the manufacturer, that money, and then you keep the car for yourself. So I wanted to buy out the car because the car was a Saab. Saab as a company had died because of the recession, and so I'm like, it's kind of sad. Let's buy this car because I really like it. So I go to a bunch of different banks and say, hey, bank, can you give me money to finance this purchase of the Saab that I'm about to buy? And all the banks said no to me. And they said no to me, not saying, oh, there's something wrong with you and we can't give you money. It's, we don't do what you're trying to do. You have to go to a dealer to buy out a car. And I'm like, that makes no sense. I already have a car in my possession. I actually drove to this bank in that car. Like, why are you asking me for to go to a dealer? Eventually, I go to a dealer, and they approved me for a loan with 2 of the banks that said no to me when I went to the bank. And then Toby had a very similar experience. He was running digital for Capital One, which is one of the largest banks in the United States. He was buying a new car, calls up Capital One out of finance, 3rd largest lender for cars in the United States, asks for a loan, and they tell him, no, you can't have a loan. If you go to one of our dealers, we'll give you a loan, but you can't have a loan just on its own. And he's like, this is the most dumb thing I've ever heard. And so we're like, clearly there's an opportunity to disrupt loan origination for car purchases that happen outside of a dealership. And that's sort of how the idea initially developed and, kind of grew from there.
So what were the key elements of getting into a situation where you could do that? Where you could, create the alternative loan context?
Well, so we spent a lot of time talking to banks. Like I said, our initial kind of product that was a made-up product was, hey, would you be willing to buy, offer a loan to a customer on Craigslist if you're an individual selling a car? Or would you as a buyer buy a car with a warranty when you're buying a car on Craigslist? And we very quickly found that actually wouldn't work. Banks wouldn't work with us. Individual sellers of cars wouldn't work with us. And the buyers who were buying a car didn't think about financing until after they decided which car to buy. And so separately, we spent a ton of time talking to banks, and the banks are like, no fucking way, excuse my language, we will not let you do what you're trying to do. You have to be a dealer to be able to do that. And so we basically spend a lot of time trying to figure out, hey, can we do this outside of a dealership model that we want to do or not? And the answer was no. But we also realized while we were doing that research that there's a huge opportunity to build a product where transaction happens differently. And so we got into buying and selling cars almost as a necessity for the product that we wanted to build, which was the financing product. We didn't initially go in thinking we're going to build a car purchase and sale platform. And so that's what I mean by test and learn, right? Like, we could have spent millions of dollars building the financing product, and then no one would have used it. Now we have this amazing financing product that everybody uses, and it's beautiful and it's wonderful, and people love it. But had we started out with that, we would have gotten nowhere. And so that was kind of the initial journey to product market fit, of understanding what is that consumers want and how do you get it into their hands.
Great. And how long did that phase take, and how did you pay for it?
I paid for it on my own. I was fortunate enough to be able to do that because of Taxi Magic, so I funded it myself for the first year. It took about 9 months, and it actually was not that expensive because you do it all as kind of made-up product. Like, we had a simple website. We called it Car Foxy. It's not up anymore, but if you saw it, your eyes would pop out. It was pretty bad. But for testing purposes, it worked. And we had a team of 3 people, doing basic testing. So I think that whole thing cost $100,000. but we learned so much for that $100,000 and saved ourselves millions of dollars and probably a totally failed opportunity had we not done that. And then we incorporated the business in December 2013, and it's now been 4.5 years since then.
And so after that phase, what was the next phase, and when did you first raise money, and what did the hiring profile look like?
Yeah, I was lucky because having done a company before, which was viewed as a successful company, it's much easier to raise capital. Like second-time entrepreneurs are really ideal entrepreneurs, and second-time entrepreneurs whose companies came really close to making it big but didn't quite become massive are actually the best because they're really hungry. Because they came, they got the taste of what it was like to succeed but didn't quite make it, and then really, really want to kind of go to the next level. So VCs love entrepreneurs that have had that experience. Peter Thiel actually literally one of his main criteria for deciding who to invest in is, hey, did this guy start a company before and did that company fail? Because that actually teaches you a ton. So I was lucky. I didn't actually have to have anything to go raise capital. Literally had a PowerPoint that said what the idea was. And we went out and we raised money in December 2013. And then we continued fundraising basically nonstop since then. I don't think I've ever been a month I have not been fundraising. We raised a seed round in kind of December, January, February, March of 2013, 2014. This is when the markets were super hot in the US, money was kind of growing on trees. At that point, it's kind of like what is happening in China now, money is just growing on trees. So we were able to do a Series A really quickly. I mean, it was kind of ridiculous that we raised a Series A within 9 months of launching in November 2014. So our phase one of the business was this hey, build a team and build the basic product based on the things that we had learned. So our initial team was the founders plus engineers and a few business people to do operations. We actually probably hired way too many business people, and that was a mistake that we paid dearly for later. And we should have hired a lot more engineers in the beginning. We just were slow at hiring engineers, and we're making up for not having enough engineers by having more business people, and that was a mistake. And then after Series A, we really started to scale, and we've been kind of scaling the business since then.
Right. And what are some things that you learned in Taxi Magic or earlier experiences that informed your strategy and process at Shift?
Well, the two things that I said in the beginning were very much informed by Taxi Magic, right? Test and learn, like I said, that was a failure of what we did that taught me that I need to test before I build something. In between Taxi Magic and Shift, I read this book called Lean Startup. And Lean Startup is a really popular book. If you haven't read it, you should read it. It's fantastic. Super simple in terms of what you should do to build the right company right way. But for me, the experience of reading that book was actually very different because I'm reading the book and I'm like, holy cow, everything he's describing I lived through. So he structured the things I had lived through, but I was like, oh, I went through this. It kind of makes sense. And so kind of test and learn is one of the things that he's really big on and I had become really big on. Team and culture is another one. We actually really didn't pay a lot of attention to culture. By the way, culture is not having free food and free drinks. Culture is what are encouraged and discouraged behaviors, what is rewarded and what is punished at a company, or in any environment. And so we have generally paid a lot more attention to how we hire and how we build culture, partly because we didn't pay a lot of attention to that at Taxi Magic. Hence my point about get co-founders and get a really strong team around you. The other thing was this kind of engineering quality. So we have chosen to have a very, very high engineering bar. You can argue whether that's good or bad, but that's the choice we've made, in large part because we had made the opposite choice at Taxi Magic of not getting really strong engineers. And that was a mistake as well, where Uber and Lyft had much stronger engineering teams and they were able to move kind of a lot faster in how to do things. Now, one more thing, in some areas we overcorrected in the wrong direction. At Taxi Magic, we had a lot of people from the taxi industry involved with the business. The board had 2 people from the taxi industry on it, and they caused a lot of problems because whenever we tried to do things that were anti the taxi industry, they go, no, don't do that. Why would you fight the taxi industry? Of course, Uber, Lyft, they destroy the taxi industry. So at Shift, I made this decision that we're going to have anybody at the company who knows anything about the auto industry in any way. So nobody on the board, nobody employed at the company, etc. Well, there's a lot of things that we would have done kind of faster had we had some auto expertise on it, because you're like, you do a bunch of stuff, you get to a learning, and they're like, well, you talk to somebody in the auto industry that tell you this is always the case. And so there we probably overcorrected a little bit too much.
Yeah, so on that one, it sounds like there's a balance of industry knowledge versus dinosaur habits.
That's a fundamental problem. Like, how do you balance that out? And the company that went public, Carvana, it was founded actually inside a car dealership. So one of the largest car dealerships in the U.S. called Drive Time, which sells about 100,000 cars a year, that is owned by one guy, and his son is the founder of the company that went public called Carvana. And so and he's like Stanford educated, kind of entrepreneur, and so they were able to balance this out really well, where they had on the one hand, like the dinosaur who knew what the auto industry was really well, and then the son who could take risks and do some really cool things.
So you've raised a few dollars for this project you're doing now. Like, how much have you raised?
Well, publicly we raised roughly $125 million.
Okay. And the back. Woo!
Publicly we actually have now, I think, announced that we raised over 140, which is also true.
It's hard to keep track. I mean, sometimes you see an extra $20 million just lying around, and you're, oh, damn, that's right, I forgot about that. Is it like that?
No, it's not like that. I don't remember what we announced when, and we had a lot of announcements recently. So
right. Yeah, and there's, so what's public, and so on and so forth. So one thing I find very interesting is...
That's not my money, right? Like, I actually don't touch that money at all, ever. I'm like one of the least well-paid people at the company, because CEOs should not be well-paid in startups in general, and so both I and my co-CEO, we are not really well paid. But it was the most money I've ever seen. So at the Series A, we're wiring your money and you're getting different wires from different people, and literally like every 1 second, refresh, has the money come in or not? And then same thing at Series B, and the money got stuck somewhere, so it actually came late. And you're like, refresh. So when 50 million arrived in Series B, that's the most money I've ever seen in a bank account by a long shot. So yeah.
Yeah, me too. So there's an interesting thing, I think, that folks who are maybe new to this startup stuff, like I said, there's sort of idea, and then there's some stuff that happens, and then money. And so it's like, wow, yeah, we got a $50 million check from Goldman Sachs or Goldman Sachs and Friends or whatever it was. And so when that money hits the bank account, people kind of think, oh, you won. Right, you won, you're rich, it's great.
You get a lease of life. You get a lease on life for a certain amount of time. That's what happens. It's not that you're rich by any means.
So how much of that do you get? Like, you take it in your pocket? Wait, what? Why you spend all this time raising all this money if you don't get it?
Well, because we have a lot of employees and we have a lot of burn and we have to pay for it. By the way, the best startups are the ones that do not require outside capital. Yeah. Let's just be really clear about this, right? Google raised money once. They didn't need to, but Kleiner Perkins and Sequoia forced $30 million down their throat. They went public with just that one round of funding. And they could have done the same thing without ever having to raise money. Now, there's a benefit you get from certain investors that is not money, and probably Google would actually have not succeeded had John Doerr not been on Google's board. So more than money, John Doerr being involved was more beneficial. And so the best companies do not need money. They're also amazing companies, obviously, they need a lot of money. Amazon burns money as if it's like, growing on trees, and they've never made any profit almost at all. And again, they build an amazing company. They're kind of both routes to do that. But this idea that, you need to raise money to be successful actually is not the right assumption to have. And the best companies are the ones that have such crazy margins that you don't need capital.
Yeah, very good point. And I was reading something that you'd mentioned about sort of your obligation to your investors. Like, whenever somebody puts money into your company, all of a sudden there's more and more pressure and more to sort of demonstrate a return is difficult.
I mean, in the U.S. at least, and most places in the world too, but the U.S. in particular, there's more capital than they know what to do with. If you're a rich person in the US, your problem isn't, like, I don't have any money, right? It's I don't know what to do with my money because I need to invest it in something and I don't know where to invest it in. Everyone wants to Sequoia, but Sequoia only raises $500 million every 3 to 4 years, and they've had the same people give them money for 40 years. They're not going to let somebody new in, right? That's where the returns are. So there's different types of return profiles for different type of capital. Venture capital has a return profile of 5 to 10x, meaning if a venture fund that has a bunch of investors in it doesn't return at least 3x on the money after fees, and fees are pretty high, that's a failure. It should return at least 3x, ideally returns 5x. If it's really successful, in other words, if it's Sequoia, it's returning 10, 20x on every fund, meaning they raise 500 million, they return 5 billion to their investors after 7 years. So when you raise money from venture capital, it comes with massive obligations because they're looking at every dollar they put in you and saying, hey, is there a clear path for me to get at least three times what I put in? Because if I don't do that, then this was a failure. Ideally 5, and actually ideally 10. Because they know that a bunch of the companies are going to fail, and so they need to make up for the companies that fail in companies that are successful. And so yes, you have huge obligations to your investors, and not actually people who gave you money, it's the people who gave them money. And most of those people are pension funds, endowments, foundations. And so if you are screwing with the money, you're actually screwing with somebody who's like a pensioner who was a teacher and whose money now, like whose pension is paid for by you being successful.
No, that's very good to take to heart. I mean, that's amazing stuff. So we do want to leave some time for questions at the end, but I have a few more things I wanted to cover. You mentioned the people side of investment, and I just want to hear a few things from you about your board and what's been the most helpful or interesting involvement you've had in your board composition.
That's a very dangerous question.
Is it difficult though?
And I will limit my statements to 2 things only. One is I have a person on my board whose name is Emily Melton, who was the very first person to join our board. I met her 3 times before we agreed for her to come on board because I already had a bunch of term sheets for the Series A, and we met her late in the process. And we fell in love with her. And we didn't really know her very well, but we said like it clearly makes sense for Emily to join our board. I say very definitely that I wouldn't have a company today had Emily not joined my board. It was probably the smartest thing I've done in this company.
What'd she do?
The best thing about a board member is that is good is that when you come to them and say, hey, I have this problem, they say, oh, that sucks. Let's figure out how to help you. Let's say Emily's very good at doing that without me saying anything about everybody else. We've had challenges as a company, and Emily has been the driving force in getting everybody else on my board to agree to the things that are problematic and how to fix them. And we've had some really big things we had to do to fix them, and when people hear those stories, which I won't talk about here because I don't talk about those publicly, the response usually is, oh my God, you have such an enlightened board. And I'm like, oh, I have one enlightened board member. So that was a thing for me, and great board members are ones that don't seek publicity and who believe that they're working for the founders and the entrepreneurs that they work with. And I'm very fortunate to have folks like that involved with the company, and that's been fantastic.
Great. So another difficult question. Jeff wanted a difficult question, so I got to give you a couple difficult questions.
Remember, I still have to have a good relationship with board members.
No. We'll go off of that. We'll do prognostication. We'll do like predicting the future stuff. That's very difficult. So in any space, any market space, there's a lot of carnage and a lot of bodies along the way of companies that were sure they were going to be the next big thing. They were going to break out. They were going to have a big exit. Are you going to have a big exit or no? Are you going to like go by the wayside?
Well, our belief generally has been that you build a company to go public. If something else happens along the way, you have obligations to your investors. Right? I'm a director of this company, and I have an fiduciary obligation to all my shareholders, not just myself. And if we have, if there's an opportunity to do something other than go public, we'll entertain it and we won't say no. But we believe that we're going to have a public company in 2 to 3 years, and we're kind of marching to do that.
All right. So when, if and when there's a big exit, are you going to come back and hang out in Georgia a little bit and help some folks?
I'm a pretty workaholic person, so hang out is not really kind of my DNA.
When I say hang out, I mean like take meetings 16 hours a day.
I don't know, maybe. I mean, my life is very much in America now. I actually did come back to Georgia, right, for a fairly long amount of time in 2003 and 2004. And I hopefully did my part. And for me, it was really important to try to put this team in Georgia, which we did, which has been awesome. I mean, we employ a lot of people, and they do really important work. Like, the company actually wouldn't function without the team here. But me moving back to Georgia is not really on the agenda.
All right, no, I'm just kidding. I mean, there's other ways to help. So yeah, I mean, this is great. One of the things that I usually like to ask about is, it seems kind of like an easy game. Like, you're like, we did this thing, we did this other thing, and then now we raised like $100 million, and it's cool, and blah blah. And we're, So was there ever a time where you weren't like super happy, and like in terms of thinking that it was like gonna be easy game?
Well, we were lucky because most companies fail early, right? Most companies don't make it to seed stage. Those that make it to seed stage don't make it to A, and those that make it to A don't make it to B. That's just the reality. By the time you make it to B, if you made it that far, the likelihood of you being successful is much higher, because just pure statistics, like batch.
Proven model.
Yeah, exactly. But then some companies have trouble later. We were lucky. We didn't actually have a lot of problems until after B. But then after B, we ran into hiccups. We didn't grow as quickly as we needed to, and we had said we were going to do X and didn't quite do X. We grew at like half the pace of what we had expected. But people, when you go to new investors, they'll say, hey, can you give me your presentation from the previous round? And then they look at it and like, hey, you promised you're going to be this big, but you're only half the size. What happened? So that was going on. And then one of our competitors that had raised a lot more money up to that point than us, and was getting a lot of press, a company called BP, went under and died literally in the middle of us fundraising for a Series C. And they didn't just die, nobody knows. No. They died, and there was a cover story in the Wall Street Journal. Because they had raised $140 million, and they were the worst failure of the year in 2016, because $140 million is a lot of money. And, it was in November, and so all the different publications were doing the retrospective on the year, and BP was like the poster child for failure. And so we ran into a lot of issues raising capital for a Series C, partly because of our own issues, and partly because BP went under and really hurt us. We got through it. It was very painful, and I was again lucky that Emily was on our board and did a lot of things to make it happen. And we got through it, and then we came out on the other side. One of my other board members says, "Look, like 100 companies enter this valley of death period, and only one comes out, and it's amazing that you guys were the ones that did." And now we're in a totally way past it and in a very different place. But it was pretty painful, and I probably didn't sleep one good night between like November 2016 and April 2017.
Yeah. The grind. So 2 more questions. One is, I think a lot of times we don't talk enough about the development of the founder or entrepreneur as a human being. And everybody's journey, we can't get too much into this, but everybody's journey, you learn things along the way and you grow and so on and so forth. What would you say about opportunities for entrepreneurs or prospective entrepreneurs or founders, especially founders of existing companies that want to go bigger and do things they've never done before? Like how do you approach that?
Well, again, I think your co-founders are most important. I'm very lucky because my best friend of 2 years, and we do all of this stuff together. We're very different people. I'm, much more intuitive. Like I make decisions just purely based on what I feel. He's very analytical and very data driven. So he'll look at a lot of numbers and make a call there, and I'll be like, this is all bullshit, this is what we should do, but oftentimes it's the same, and if it's not, we actually can talk through and decide what the answer is based on how we approach things. So I think one is you just need to have a partner that you can really, really trust, who can be that kind of counterpart to how you think. I'm very lucky to have that because we've known each other for vast majority of our lives basically, and we know exactly what the other person's going to say about any given thing, and you can have a very good rapport from that. Secondly, and this is something that has been really awesome actually for me the last few years is executive coaching. So, a lot of people who don't do executive coaching might think, oh, if I do executive coaching, that means I'm admitting some kind of failure. It's actually not. It's admitting that you are not perfect, and nobody's perfect. And so what we've done is we have an executive coach. Toby and I have the same coach. His name's Jeff Hunter. He runs a company called Talentism. It's just a really amazing organization. And, he came in. He did a huge survey of all our employees. He then did a survey of the whole company, about the company, and came back with really, really hurtful, in some ways, feedback.
Or painful.
Yeah, which is like, oh, you suck at this, and you suck at this, and you suck at this. He prefaced it by saying, look, guys, you have a company that you made from zero to this, so clearly you don't suck at everything, but you really suck at a lot of this stuff. And then, we work with them on fixing those things. I think executive coaching is really awesome. There's now companies that are very much like democratizing coaching. So there's a company called BetterUp that enables it for, a mass peak population, so to say. I mean, Jeff Hunter can only work with so many people at once, and he's very expensive. But you can get coaching much more broadly for a lot less money, such as with BetterUp. But I think that has been a really awesome thing for us. Now, what I also learned is, and this is something that he really strongly believes in and has been how we've approached things, is some things are not going to change. Like me going to a meeting and having a very strong opinion about what we're talking about and get into an argument and forcing people to argue with me, that's not going to change. But what I can do is when I walk into a room and say, with somebody I don't know well or who hasn't worked with me a lot, is like, hey guys, just so you know, I'm going to ask a ton of questions. I'm going to offer a lot of counterpoints. I'm going to probably become loud. That does not mean I'm yelling at you. I'm not arguing with you. This is how I think, and likelihood is very high I'm going to come out on your side of things in the end. If you tell people that, at least when you do that in a meeting, they don't get shocked and feel like, oh my God, this guy hates me and he's going to fire me tomorrow. Right? So coaching does not necessarily lead you to becoming different, but it leads you to communicating with your team about what it is that you're doing and why, so they can actually deal with it better.
Yeah, and to me, it goes back a lot to self-knowledge. Like, if you're going to try to exceed anything you're capable of now, you have to learn more about yourself and get superpowers. And I think about coaching like athletes, right? If athletes said, well, I don't need a coach because I can run really fast and I can play really well, it's like, no, but if you want to be world class, you have to have that extra bump. And the final question I would ask, and then we'll have some questions from the audience, and I think Guillaume can handle the mic for that. So here's sort of from the game show in the U.S. the $64,000 question. A really important question for Georgia right now. There's a lot of vision for doing startup. There's a lot of energy in young people and creative older people, and just like there's a lot of energy and a lot of support from the government that I don't see other places. What are some things that you see that can help Georgia get to the next level? I mean, it's a small country. It doesn't have 80 years of entrepreneurial, history and exits and successful founders coaching the next generation. Like, what are a couple things you think might be useful for Georgia right now?
Well, first, so I spent about 18 months in Georgia in 2003, 2004. Then I wrote a book about the time period I was here, and I went off and didn't come back until 2012. Georgia, I didn't because the likelihood was extremely high I was going to end up in jail because of the things I said. So first of all, night and day difference in where Georgia is today versus where it was in 2010, 2011, whatever. And I think the country has massively turned the corner. It kind of went through this incredible despotism, which, unfortunately now the U.S. might be approaching in some respects.
We digress.
Yeah, but it's fixed itself, and that's a really good thing, and people deserve huge credit for being able to do that because it was done in a truly peaceful, like, democratic way. And it's very sad that most people do not give Georgia credit for what it's done. I think that's pretty incredible, and it needs to be out there in a serious way. So that's number one. Number two is I've not spent a lot of time with businesses in Georgia. That's the reality, but I've spent a little bit of time. You came out and you introduced me to some folks in the U.S. I've come here once other time, and I met with a bunch of founders. It's actually pretty incredible, some of the stuff that people are working on, and is really awesome. And I think, it's risky, but I think it's really encouraging and really awesome, and I just continue to kind of do more of that. The thing about starting companies is that most of them are going to fail. But failure is not a bad thing. Failure should be encouraged. And that's the thing that makes Silicon Valley completely unique from everyone else. Failure is massively encouraged. And people can fail once, twice, 3 times, and they still will be given a chance to do it again. It's very different from how I think approach things here. They want it to work right away. It's just kind of culturally what happens. It's not going to happen. Most people who start companies are going to fail. Hopefully they get a chance to start them again and again and again. And that's the reality of being an entrepreneur.
And you'd mentioned also like the potential for Georgia just because of its region and the openness and the fact that people like to hang out here, that there may be opportunities for Georgia in a different way than, say, Estonia and the first.
Yeah, I spent the last 2 years, and I'm going to go again this year. I went to Web Summit, so I spoke at Web Summit, and then there's this conference afterwards that's called Founders that is organized. And to me, I don't like going to conferences, actually. Like, in fairness, it's pretty not useful use of my time. I do it because my team really wants me to go to conferences, because there's this desire to be out there with other big companies presenting, because then it means that Shift is at the same level as that, and that's awesome. So I do it because the team wants me to do it.
Branding.
Huh?
Yeah, branding.
Yeah. But one of the conferences I really love going to is this conference called Founders, because it's a 3-day boondoggle where you do nothing but party with other really good founders from all over the world. But it's an incredible opportunity to reminisce and walk through what you went through, what they're going through. There are founders who are more grown up than you are as a company, founders that are younger. You can talk to the younger ones about what they went through and vice versa with the older ones. And there are very few places in the world where you can party as hard as you can party in Georgia. So that's just the reality. And so I think there's a pretty awesome opportunity to do something similar to that here. I think that for it to be successful, it kind of has to be like Web Summit in that the government has to really encourage it. Lisbon is literally shut down for 4 or 5 days around Web Summit. Roads are, moving in a different direction. People don't go to work, etc. But the state has chosen to make that be a big deal, and it's really put Portugal on the map in terms of a startup community, and they're seeing really positive traction from that. So I don't think you can do it in a kind of, excuse my language, half-ass way. If you're going to do it, you're going to do it in a real way. But I think there's a ton of opportunity in that, given the amount of awesome press Georgian tourism is getting today, and what you could turn into with kind of the founder community.
Great, yeah, and just an example of some of the buzz that George is getting. I mean, when we went to the London Startup Grind Europe meeting and did these side events and basically brought all of the Startup Grind chapter directors and international leadership to a party in the loft in Shoreditch with Georgian wine and photos and everything, all those folks really want to come to Georgia because, and I think it's a strategic asset, because it's not a strategic asset.
My dad always used to joke about Kartveleb's Gochabi Mikondat Moskoshi during the Soviet times, right? Which is taking pics to I told you the story. And it's actually how Georgia would gain a lot of influence over the Soviet regime, right? And the same thing can be very applicable to the international community.
Great. So we'll work on So we'll work on bringing some folks here. Let's move a little bit to question and answer period. We're having a little longer time here on the fireside chat. We'll do a few questions now. We also, I think, would you be willing, if we had some questions on the internet, to maybe chime in afterwards?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, great. So we'll do a few of them now. Also, there will be time afterwards for networking, having another glass of wine and a snack. So some questions and answers there. Do you want to grab some questions from the audience?
Yes. How about I take 2 microphones so we can ask, and you're going to answer anyway. So yes.
First of all, thank you very much for giving us an opportunity to listen to George's speech and his insights. My name is Katia Sidamanidze. I'm the founder of Versatile Chaos Consulting. And my question is quite existential. You just mentioned that you are too workaholic and don't really have time to have fun. So what's the point in living if you can't live the life?
Well, look, I actually, like I said, I don't really care about cars, right? It's not my thing at all. Everyone assumes I'm really into cars, and I don't know anything about cars at all. I really wanted to build an awesome team, and I get a lot of pleasure out of watching that awesome team that I built do amazing things. And most of the time, I don't even tell them what to do. They just kind of go figure it out on their own, right? If it has to come to me or to Toby for a decision, that's actually bad news. That means that something failed. But watching the team that I built kind of go after really awesome stuff and grow from, like the guy who runs sales at Shift, he's a 27-year-old guy who we hired as our first driver, who would take cars from our warehouse to customers' houses for a test drive. And now he runs a team of 30 people running all our sales. Irina was like literally emailing people on Craigslist, and now she manages a team of 60 people. So for me, seeing my team do awesome stuff and then kind of grow is really fantastic, and it's actually really enjoyable and
Rewarding.
Yeah. So I think that's actually a lot of fun.
Thank you very much.
I'm the next. Hi, George. My question is more like business related regarding the shift, and I'm interested, I'm pretty familiar mostly of the operational processes that is done within the company, and my question is related to what part of the business do you think is easily scalable and replicable into other states or even on a cross-border nature, and what part is most resource consuming?
Our business is much more operational than we thought it would be when we started. And I think if we had realized how operational it'd be, we probably wouldn't have done the company. So quite honestly, look, we're doing it now and we're succeeding, but it has been way more painful. It's cost a lot more money than we thought it would to get to the stage, given how operational it is. So the software we build is actually very kind of scalable. And you would need probably 6 months of work to make it applicable outside of the US in terms of data sources, etc. But it's technically very applicable. Operations abroad are going to be a lot harder. So when we thought about how do you go abroad, one thought to then take the software, repackage it, give it to our people as almost like a franchise, and they build their own businesses on top of it. But the business is very operational, and that's where the challenges of the business are.
Software, you mean on the inventory management side?
Well, all of it. Means on the seller side, on the operational side internally, or on the pricing, or on the buy side, or how you originate financing. All the software we have is very scalable, but unfortunately, and I say unfortunately because I thought we could try to have a lot more outsourcing, we've had to own the operation ourselves, and that's the costly part of the business.
Thank you.
Hello, thank you. First of all, I would like to thank you for your time here. And my question is following that. I run a software company. We do websites and mobile apps. So at some time you reach the point where you can cover your bills, you can pay your salaries, but you understand that you need to grow, you need to take a next step. So is there any suggestion to that? What can you perform in order to convert your little bit small business into something more than you have today? Thanks.
Well, first, having a small business that's paying your bills and paying your salaries is a really good thing, and you should be very proud of that, right?
Thank you.
Most people wouldn't be, but I think you gotta give credit where credit is due. I still can't pay my bills with Shift, right? We still burn a lot of money every month. Well, first you need to decide you want to do that. I think, and that's a very big question because that's a choice you have to make. Secondly, is there something you can actually do that would result in growth? And I don't know your business at all, so that's the question you need to ask and come up with it. And thirdly, growth generally requires capital. So if you have to generate your own capital to grow, you have to get capital from somebody else to grow.
Thank you.
Can I ask the question? Yeah, hi. My question is, most founders here probably want to make it big in US, and we don't know what customers' needs are in US and what problems are they facing in there every day.
Yeah.
Well, we know how to build products, so how can we build this gap?
First, you shouldn't try to make it big in the U.S. That's just a wrong choice, wrong thing to do, right? You can make it big here. You can make it big across the Caucasus. Maybe you can make it big across some parts of the Soviet Union. You can build great businesses in those countries, and you probably will be more successful in those countries than an American company going into Ukraine. That's just a fact. And so don't plan on going to the U.S. because that's not the right answer. Secondly, if you're going to go abroad, and I don't know anything about enterprise businesses because I've only built consumer businesses, going after consumer businesses, terrible idea. Because you'll never understand consumers from here and how they behave in the UK or in the US. I mean, how consumers in California are different than consumers in New York. And so I would say enterprise businesses that can sell to other companies probably make a lot more sense than consumer business.
Got it. Thanks.
Even though enterprise businesses are not sexy and consumer businesses are allegedly sexy.
Thanks.
Hello. Here. Thank you for your great speech. I'm Konstantin from iSnap, and I have two questions. The first is, for example, I get to have a wonderful idea, and I think it's great, and I think it's like a new internet and maybe new Facebook, and I'm like flying in the sky and think that it will grow wide. And what do you think? What at this point, what must I do? What questions must I ask myself to come down to the ground, maybe? And the second question, I just will say that if I get to decide to just build the thing that I've just thought about, I have an idea, and I don't have funds to get a good mentorship. Yep. How to approach this question? How to ask others? Whom to ask advice? And for example, how to compose an email to send to you for you to answer me? Like, how to approach this question? Thank you.
Hard. So I'm not yet done, right? My company's still kind of being built from scratch, so sending an email to me to ask me questions is the wrong thing to do. There are people who are done with their companies. Their company was bought or company has gone public that are much more prepared to spend time with other entrepreneurs. So those are the people you should approach. Generally speaking, most founders got a lot of help along the way to get to where they are. And they're very willing to give help to other people. That's just the reality. Like, I wouldn't be where I am without a lot of help, and then you have to kind of give back. That's just how this whole thing works. And as far as your first question, I would start reading Eric Ries's book, Lean Startup. Most likely, there is no new internet. Blockchain might be a new internet. I kind of joke about that sometimes, but let's be real. So simplify, pick one feature, two features, three features, test on your way into whether those are the things that customers want to have or not. Because most people will have an idea that's very grandiose, and that is actually one of the things that leads to failure. So we should try to be maybe gender neutral in the questions if we can. So I think there's
thank you very much, Colin, for, each of your next events is becoming bigger and bigger, and that says a lot about you and your intention to make this entrepreneurship really big in Georgia, and thank you for that. Now the question is, for a guy from the 90s to go to the United States and then becoming successful, if you call yourself successful, you are becoming a role model for a lot of other people, but do you yourself have any role models or some people from the people alive or not alive that you would like to meet or you call your role models, maybe? Thank you.
Well, in business, yeah, of course I have role models. So I really love Elon Musk. Now, I really like Jeff Bezos. Those are people who I really admire, and I think they've done things from which I learn all the time. Some of the things I love about them, most people hate. I love that Elon Musk is a grinder and drives people crazy, because I think most business development is grinding. And so to me, that's awesome. I also love that they dream about crazy things and then make them happen, right? And because I try to do the same thing. I'm nowhere near as good or as inspiring as they are, but I certainly try to be. And so, yeah, that's my short answer to that question.
Thank you.
Hi, right here. Thanks for the great speech. So I want to get your take on what are the main things to get right in company culture.
Well, first of all, what's the definition of company culture? Company culture, in my view, and this is not my definition, but this is my executive coach's definition, is what is encouraged and discouraged behavior, what is rewarded and what is punished at a company. And I think most people don't get that about what culture is, and they end up spending a lot of time on like, oh, let's do fun events for team, or let's do, how do we make the people feel better? People feel better and really good about a company when there's clarity around what needs to happen, what the goals are, and what are the paths to achieving those goals. What are the things that they will do that will be rewarded? What are the things that they might do that will be discouraged and punished? I think if you do those things, if you set clarity for the vision and the goals, give them a path to hitting success against those goals, reward those that actually achieve the results that you want to achieve, and help those that don't, and if necessary, fire those that don't. And by the way, that's a really big deal as well. People who fail should be fired. Keeping people who fail is not a good thing for anybody. You'll have really good company culture.